Hello everyone! I'm back with another series of reviews from one of the months of 2023. This time it's for February of the year. The shortest month and also one of the months that I didn't read as much as I'd like. To be fair, there was a lot going on this month. My sister got married, so we were in Cancun for that, and our family was here staying with us in New York for a couple of weeks, so there was a lot of fun to be had and I didn't get to do much reading. But that's not the point of this video. Let me talk about the books that I did get to read. So the first book that I read and finished in the month was a new release called 7 Faceless Saints. This is by M.K. Lob, and this was actually one of the books that I brought with me to Cancun to read, and I actually ended up finishing it on the flight to Cancun on my way there. This is a new YA fantasy. It's the first of a duology, and I flew through it so fast because the writing is pretty easy to read, and that made my reading experience quite effortless. There are a lot of familiar sort of YA fantasy touchstones in this story, and it kind of made me nostalgic, which is a good thing. It didn't feel like it reminded me too much of other books. It just gave me the same vibe as them, and I think I really enjoyed that. I liked seeing this author's take on everything, and I particularly enjoyed how she portrayed our two main characters and their dynamic, especially because it's set against the backdrop of sort of an unplanned and not really desired partnership because they have to solve a murder mystery. I mean, honestly, just say the words murder mystery and I tend to be very into fantasy books. Considering how the things wrapped up at the end of this book, I'm definitely curious to see where the story goes in the next one. I don't know that I could say that it's a new favorite yet, but we shall see what the duology brings us. The other book that I read while I was away in Cancun and on my way back was a book by an author that I'm very familiar with, and that is Silver and the Bone, which is by Alexandra Bracken. This is the start of a new, I want to say, duology from Alex Bracken, and I've enjoyed all of the books that she's written, but this is actually one of my particular favorites. I think it's because from the very beginning I was already caught up in the way that she decided to tell this story. I love that she combines sort of Celtic lore and Arthurian legend, that there is a quest and journey aspect to the story, especially with some unexpected allies in it, and the plot kind of kept me on my toes, even though, you know, it does have also some of the hallmarks of the YA fantasy genre. I know what I personally like in my fantasy reads, and I'm a big quest with unexpected allies girl, so of course that part of the story definitely appealed to me. And I also really enjoyed our main character Tamsin. She's really strong-willed and she's really determined and loyal, but she's also frustrating at times, which I think is just normal considering she has to deal with so much and has so much on her shoulders. It was really interesting to watch her story unfold. All in all, I would consider this one another really good story from Alex Bracken, and I'm definitely looking forward to the sequel, especially given how this one ends. The next book that I read is a book also by an author that I'm very familiar with, and that is The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. This is set in the world of the Cruel Prince series, but it follows a different set of characters. And I honestly didn't know what I was expecting going into it, but it was cool to be back in that same world of fairy that Holly Black has created. I really enjoy her take on fae and fairy. I think that it's one of the ways that feels the most authentic to me in terms of what I grew up knowing about fairy and fae, because, you know, they're wonderful but they're also terrible, and they're magical but that's also horrible. Anyway, my problem with this one kind of was that the beginning took a little too long for me to set everything up and for the pacing to pick up in the story. It was like 100 pages in before I got really interested in where we were going with it. And honestly, I just didn't feel very strongly about the characters at all, which is a shame. I would have loved to be able to fall in love with another heroine, especially in that world, because I, you know, would like to see how that goes. However, it read really quick because Holly Black does know how to tell a story, and given where that one ends as well, I also would like to see the outcome of the setup in this book. So then I read one YA contemporary, and that is Chloe and the Kaishao Boys by May Koyuto. And the reason that I read this one is because she's a Filipino author, Filipino-Chinese, and she actually lives in Manila, and of course I was going to read it, right? I was really hoping to enjoy this, and luckily I did. If you've ever been a fan of sort of teen rom-coms or teen romance movies, if you've ever been a fan of Cinema One style movies, that's a channel in the Philippines that shows a lot of, you know, romance films, among other things. And if you're, you know, cool with following a little bit older but still a teen protagonist, I think this might be a book that you would enjoy. It is a little bit cheesy and it does get a little bit over the top at times, but there is also a heartwarming aspect to it that I did not anticipate. I loved seeing the Pinoy references and the Manila setting. I liked seeing these characters have to go through situations that I've either been through or have seen people go through. It felt very relatable and real, and it was also really nice just to follow Chloe's journey, to see where she was at the start and how things end up for her, and I honestly felt very content with how her story wrapped up. For my buddy read with Danica in February, I finally read The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This one is a chunker, but I really love the sprayed edges. Anyway, it stuns me that it took me so long to finally pick up this book, especially given that I ended up really enjoying it. It's not a perfect book, and I find that I still prefer Shannon's The Bone Season series. That series I absolutely love. But I think I just picked this up at the right time for me. I found myself very immersed in the world and learning about it and learning about these different characters that we follow and their lives and their histories. I liked following the twists and turns that it took, and I will admit that the beginning was slow, the pacing was slow, but it felt like it was okay that it was, just because that it was setting up the world, and there is a lot of political stuff that comes into play by the end of it. And things do pick up past a certain point. I'll say the uneven pacing is part of why this one isn't entirely a new favorite for me, but I can see the clever way in which Samantha Shannon decided to construct this narrative. I enjoyed getting to know all these characters and being in this world, and I'm definitely curious to pick up the prequel novel, A Day of Fallen Night, and to see how I feel about that one. And then the last 3 books I'm going to talk about this month are all kind of related to each other. So we have the last 2 books in the Percy Jackson series, and the first book, oops, it's upside down, and the first book in the Heroes of Olympus series. So that's Percy Jackson and the Battle of the Labyrinth, and Percy Jackson and the Last Olympian, and The Lost Hero. So it was nice to revisit these 2 books in the series. These 2 have always been my favorites in the series, especially the Battle of the Labyrinth. I actually think this time I'm more partial to The Last Olympian, but it is nice to continue on with Percy's story. I said this in the other video, but it felt like revisiting something that felt cozy and comforting, but also still felt refreshing because I hadn't experienced it in years. I love following Percy and the gang. I love seeing what they got up to. I was very invested in the outcomes of their stories, and I was once again very in awe of how Rick Riordan wove the mythology into the modern day. I think he made it accessible for younger audiences, and I think that's a good thing. They're not always necessarily the most accurate, I guess, portrayals. I'm sure people who have studied mythology in depth or ancient history in depth probably have a lot to say about this, but for me, like, it was just a fun time and also pretty educational in some ways, so it was great to experience them. And these covers are the Nerdy Ink covers again. And then we get to The Lost Hero. This is the start of a spin-off series that is connected to Percy Jackson, but it is pretty jarring to start this book because you're following a completely new cast of characters. So especially given that I just piggybacked right off of my Percy Jackson reread into the Heroes of Olympus, it still felt jarring, even though I knew to expect it, that I wasn't with Percy and the gang for this one. However, it was fun to get to know Jason, Piper, and Leo, who are the main narrators of this book, all over again. It was so interesting to see the setup for everything in this story, given that I know how the series ends. That part was very interesting to me. I definitely hadn't revisited this one in a long time, so a lot of the actual plot surprised me, and I was really glad to be surprised by that. And I did enjoy my time with this book, although I deeply, deeply missed Percy and the gang in it, so there's that. This is a fun time, but I will say it definitely will throw you off if you are already deeply invested in Percy and his friends and Camp Half-Blood, because this sort of changes everything up a little bit. And there you have it. Those are all the books that I read in February. Like I said, not a lot because I was really having a busy month, but it was still a pretty good reading month. I read a lot of things that I ended up really enjoying. And yeah, so those are all my thoughts on the books that I read in February, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!